Hi, everyone. May I please request everyone to please be seated so we can start. May we request everyone to please be seated. We're going to start in 30 seconds. Reggie Casas, please sit down. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ruthie Owen. I'm the Vice Chair for the Energy Committee, and I'm your MC for today's second face-to-face economic briefing and general membership meeting of the Management Association of the Philippines. Magandang hapon. On behalf of the MAP Board of Governors, I would like to call this MAP Economic Briefing and General Membership Meeting to order. Please rise for the invocation to be led by Tata Medado, the President of NU Asia Pacific College, and please remain standing for the Philippine National Anthem.
Let us place ourselves in the presence of God. We praise and thank you, God Almighty, for gathering the Management Association of the Philippines members and guests together for this second face-to-face MAP General Membership Meeting and Economic Briefing. Bless us, O Lord, our organizers, MAP members, and everyone in this gathering with good health, which we direly need in these challenging times. We thank you for our speakers who will share with us their wisdom, fortitude, expertise, and knowledge. Bless those of BSP and NEDA, enable them to sustain efforts towards economic recovery, attract more local and foreign investments, improve the ease of doing business, and create more jobs, particularly in the countryside. We implore you to guide our new government leaders so that they may better serve our countrymen with wisdom and integrity, all of them blessed with the qualities of a servant leader. Help us steer our respective businesses towards a sustainable level of profitability to allow us to help create jobs and contribute to the elimination of poverty. Stabilize our communities, unite us in our compassion, remove all fear from our hearts, fill us with confidence in your care. Make us generous of our time, talent, and treasure, especially to the least in society. Let us all pause for a moment to pray for the eternal repose of MAP Honorary Member, His Excellency President Fidel V. Ramos, who passed away at the age of 94, July 31st, 2022. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and may your perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace. Amen. We ask all of these in your name, Jesus Christ, your Son. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, ay nasasilanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang binirang, kuyak ka ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka masisigil, sa nagatang tunog sa simoy at sa langit ng bagaw, ay hinagang tulakaw.
Please be seated. For the welcome remarks, may I call on the President of MAP and the President and CEO of Metro Pacific Water, Secretary Babes Singson.
To our speakers and my good friends, Secretary Arsi BALISACAN and BSP Governor FELIPE MEDALLA, distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic circle, the academe, our friends from media, fellow MAP members, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Board of Governors of the MAP, we welcome all of you to this second face-to-face MAP Economic Briefing and General Membership Briefing. In today's GMM, we hope to be enlightened on the priority programs of NEDA and the BSP and discuss how MAP can work with them in implementing the Marcos Jr. administration's economic agenda and in pushing for the MAP policy recommendations, which we submitted to the Office of the President last July 1st, 2022. This is in line with the thrust of MAP for 2022 under our theme of Push for Change Towards a Better Future for All. I am referring to our main thrust of policy reforms for economic dynamism, where MAP is pushing for vital policy reforms through executive or legislative action to sustain economic recovery, attract more local and foreign investments, improve the ease of doing business, and to create more jobs, particularly in the countryside. Our two other priority trusts for 2022 are human development and well-being and shared prosperity and sustainability. In the interest of time, I'd like to just show the slides of these 8 priority areas that we had proposed. We will give to everyone the full text of my speech so that we can, I'd like to give more time to our speakers. In relation to the MAP policy recommendation pertaining to infrastructure adequacy, the MAP Infrastructure Committee, the Technical Working Group on Transport, led by Eddie Yap, is now working with DOTR Secretary Jimmy Bautista and his team to help the DOTR achieve its goals to improve and elevate the Philippine public transport system into global standards. Further to the infrastructure policy adequacy, specifically on providing an attractive PPP policy environment, MAP co-signed recently with the Foundation for Economic Freedom and the Makati Business Club a joint letter to the President pointing out some provisions of the IRR of the BOT law and our appeal to the President to address our concerns. Also, in relation to the MAP policy recommendations pertaining to fiscal and financial policies, the MAP Tax Committee, chaired by Attorney Dick Du Baladad, and the MAP Board of Governors had a meeting recently with BIR Commissioner Lilia Guillermo. We discussed possible areas of cooperation between BIR and MAP. And again, in the interest of time, the other details of what was discussed will be circulated. As part of MAP's support to BIR through our tax committee, we released on August 10 a circular asking MAP members to please respond to the BIR survey on the PFRS, or the Philippine Financial Reporting Standards, versus the current National Internal Revenue Code so that BIR can address some of the concerns of the private sector. The BIR would like to determine through the survey if the taxpayers are experiencing difficulties concerning the impact of PFRS in the audited financial statements, impact of tax laws in the annual income tax return, and other areas. If you have not done so, we appeal, please respond to the survey not later than August 22nd. In relation to the MAP policy recommendations pertaining to justice and the rule of law, MAP co-signed recently the joint letter to President BBM, the government's plan to ensure freedom of speech and press freedom, rule of law, and adoption of good governance principles. For the information of the MAP membership, representing MAP, I attended the August 17 launch of Kapatid Angat Lahat Alliance. With MSMEs contributing the biggest share of employment in the country, Kapatid Angat Lahat aims to scale up support to nation building by providing a platform to communicate immediate opportunities for entrepreneurs in accelerating generation of jobs, increasing productivity, and growing sustainable enterprises through partnership with big business and MSMEs. In that launch, as I mentioned, I signed the pledge, which is a renewed commitment of MAP. The Kapatid Angat Lahat initiative is under the Pilipinas Angat Lahat program led by former Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship and Go Negosyo founder Joey Concepcion. Another project of the Filipinas Angat Lahat Alliance is the Msme Summit, which will be held next week, August 26, where I, together with some other MAP members, will be present. At this point, let me remind all MAP members that you have until 5 p.m. today to submit your nominations for MAP Management Man of the Year or MAP Management Person of the Year. Please help the MMY Search Committee chaired by Gigi Montinola and the MMY Judging Committee chaired by Ed Chua to produce the 46th recipient of the MAP Management Man of the Year Award. Thank you to the MAP members who have submitted their nominations for MAP governors for 2023 to 2024. In 2 weeks, the MAP Nominations and Election Committee, chaired by Malu Cristobal, will release the circular on the election of MAP governors for 2023 to 2024. The election period will start on September 1, 2022, and end on October 12, 2022. On September 13, 2022, the MAP Conference Committee, chaired by Alma Jimenez, will hold the hybrid MAP International CEO Conference on the theme, The Winds of Change, Thriving in a World of In-Betweens. For everyone's information, the board just waived the fees for attending that CEO conference. So I hope to see more of you in that conference. Thank you to Converge ICT, First Holdings, and Business World for co-presenting this year's MAP conference. Flash on your screen are our partners so that we could waive the conference fees. Thank you to all these corporations. At this point, may I invite you to the forthcoming MAP events, like what's flashed on your screen, the face-to-face in August 24, the MAP PMA PMAP joint GMM on human capital, and of course, for the golfers, We have something for you on November 3. This is going to be our first, I believe, in 2 years. This will be held, if I'm not mistaken, will be at Wakwak. And then November 11, the MAP Next Gen Conference. Finally, please monitor your emails, Viber inboxes. We have a lot of them, I realize. I have like 15 Viber groups that I have to attend to. The MAP website and the MAP Memo, our weekly electronic newsletter, for more information on MAP's forthcoming events, as well as regular updates on our activities. Thank you very much to all for attending this afternoon, and stay safe, stay healthy, everyone. Good morning.
Thank you, babes. So I think the next part of this program, we are going to induct about 10 new members. I see some names here that I know. Ambassador Laura Bofis, British ambassador to the Philippines. You got Bernadette Nacario of Google Philippines. Just people I know, but yes, at this point, let's call on the membership committee chair, Mr. Gigi Montinola, who's also the chair of Far Eastern University, who's going to induct the new members.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to announce that this afternoon we are inducting 11 new members, which will increase our total membership from 1,064 to 1,074. As always, we have a bumper crop of new inductees. I shall read the name and then please come to the stage. First, we have Secretary ARSENIO Arsi BALISACAN, Socioeconomic Planning Secretary and Director General of the National Economic Development Authority, otherwise known as NEDA. Line of business, as you know, is government service, and his sponsors are Mr. Rogelio Singson and myself. Second, we have Governor FELIPE MEDALLA, Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, otherwise known as the BSP. Line of business, again, obviously, government service, and the sponsors are Secretary Rogelio Singson and myself. The third name is Mr. Juan Ping F. Alfonso, President and CEO of Light Rail Manila Corporation. Line of business is railway transportation. Sponsors are Mr. Edgar Chua and Secretary Rogelio Singson. Fourth, we have Mr. Robert Lester Robert Aranton, President of Warehouse Management and Trade Development Services, Inc. Line of business is logistics, warehousing, and transport services. Sponsors are Secretary Alfredo Pascual and Attorney Francis Lim. Fifth is Ambassador Laura Bofis, the British Ambassador to the Philippines. Line of business is diplomatic service, and the sponsors are Attorney Francis Lim and Ms. Rizalina Mantaring. Sixth, we have Mr. Eduardo Luis Ed Tanluy, President and COO of Macroeconomic Corporation. Line of business is in-flight catering, ground handling and aircraft maintenance, natural resources development, water distribution and treatment. Sponsors are Attorney Francisco Ed Lim and Secretary Rogelio Singson. Seventh, we have Ms. Teresa Ann M. Menardo, Chief Strategy Officer of FINMA Education Holdings, Inc. Line of business is education. Sponsors are Dr. Chito Salazar and Attorney Francis Lim. Eighth, we have Ms. Bernadette Det Nacario, the Country Director of Google Philippines. Line of business is online advertising and navigation platform. Sponsors are Marife Zamora and Attorney Francis Lim. Ninth, we have Mr. Amit Kumar Oberoi, General Manager of Shangri-La at the Fort. Obviously, hotel management. As the sponsors are Francis Lim and Dr. Alfredo Pascual. 10th, we have Yasmin Ann Yas Cruz Santos, Business Development Head of Victory Liner, Inc. Line of business, transportation and cargo services. Sponsors are Attorney Francis Lim and Secretary Rogelio Singson. And last but not least, our 11th inductee, Mr. Arlo A.G. Sarmiento, Chairman and CEO of Vivant Energy Corporation. Line of business is renewable and non-renewable power generation. Sponsors are Mr. Sebastian Quiñones Jr. and Mr. Ernesto B. Tantanco. At this point, as you can see, it's a very good crop of new inductees, and we're always biased, but we always say that we feel we're the best, management organization in the Philippines. At this point, we'd like to call on our MAP President, Secretary Babe Singson, to lead the induction of new members. Please all rise to add solemnity to the occasion.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do hereby solemnly pledge that I will perform well and faithfully, to the best of my ability, my duties as a regular member, in order to contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the Management Association of the Philippines. So help me God. Congratulations to all and welcome. Salamat.
Congratulations to our new members. Congratulations. Wow, exciting, right? So is this the best management association in the Philippines, according to GG? Do you agree? All right, please sit down. Let's continue with our program. I've never seen so much excitement with the members being inducted. Okay. Do you mind taking your seats, please? So we can proceed with the main program. Okay, in line with MAP policy and in the interest of time, we will dispense with the lengthy introduction of our speakers. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes for the selfies and the photo op. Baka ma-offend ang speakers natin. No, it's okay. Okay, 1 minute. Ganito pala yung MC, no? Parang you have to control the crowd. I didn't get the memo, but okay, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated so we can proceed with our program because our guest speakers also have other things to do. Okay, so in line with MAP policy and in the interest of time, we will dispense with the lengthy introduction of our speakers. Their profiles will be flashed on the screen, and I would like to remind our speakers that you are given 20 minutes each for your respective presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first speaker, the Director General of the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA, and the Socioeconomic Planning Secretary, Secretary ARSENIO, RCM, BALISACAN.
Thank you. Governor FELIPE MEDALLA, MAP President, and my former colleague in the cabinet, Babe Singson, governors of the Management Association of the Philippines, leaders and members of the private sector, friends from the media and civil society, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would first like to express my gratitude to the Management Association of the Philippines for extending this invitation to me and for accepting me as your new member. In the past decade, I have had the opportunity to help design, influence, and implement public policies at the highest level. I consider it a rare privilege to speak in front of you, leaders and private sector members as we collectively confront significant but not insurmountable economic challenges today. Before I begin, kindly indulge me, as I am sure that some or even most of you, being leaders of the private sector, have already heard much of what I am going to share. First, let me discuss the general macroeconomic picture. As you may already know, our economy recorded a gross domestic product or GDP growth of 7.4% for the second quarter of 2022. This number was slightly below market expectations. However, it is nonetheless welcome news since the economy is coming off a relatively higher base as we recorded a 12.1% GDP growth or growth rate for the comparable quarter in 2021. Before the pandemic, the economy grew at an average rate of about 6.3% in the past decade. Our most recent growth performance puts our first semester average this year at 7.8%, above the full year target of 6.5% to 7.5%. It is therefore encouraging that rapid growth that is at least at par with our performance in the past decade is returning despite the global headwinds. It's also interesting to note that the country's economic growth in the past decade is much less correlated with global growth than before, indicating that robust and promising economic activity has driven much of our expansion. As my colleague Governor MEDALLA has also pointed out in a recent forum we attended together, it is possible that even with the vagaries of global growth and the disruptions that have occurred in the past decade, the inflows of remittances from overseas Filipinos have helped keep domestic consumption solid and steady. Indeed, the data confirms this observation. Consumption and investment have been growing considerably fast in the first half. After 2 years, pent-up demand and fixed capital formation propelled the economy forward as face-to-face commercial activities, especially in the services sector, resume. In light of the resumption of on-site learning and the gradual return of tourism activity, we expect these two demand components to remain strong in the near term. Compared to our major ASEAN neighbors, we currently stand as the best performing economy, at least for the first semester of this year, outpacing Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, while the IMF and World Bank projects lower growth for the Philippines in 2023, I think including Romi's projection, we believe we can sustain the momentum. Domestic and external headwinds pose risk to our high growth trajectory. The economic team of the Marcos administration is aware of such risk and is committed to manage them accordingly. The most pressing of this concern is, of course, high inflation, especially for food and transportation. This is primarily caused by elevated commodity and input prices as an effect of geopolitical and trade tensions, even as the global economy shows signs of recession and slowdown. These concerns are exacerbated by disruptions in our food sector, as highly infectious animal diseases, low production levels in agricultural commodities, and inclement weather disrupt the sector. The tighter fiscal space and limited absorptive capacity of the bureaucracy constrained the government from providing timely and effective assistance to the most vulnerable segments of the population. Of course, the emergence of new COVID-19 or COVID-19 variants remains an ever-present threat. Still, the economic managers remain optimistic. Despite these headwinds, we believe that the headline macroeconomic targets for the medium term outlined by the President during his State of the Nation address are attainable. The overall goal from 2023 to 2028 is to reinvigorate job creation and poverty reduction by steering the economy back to its high growth path. In particular, we see the private sector playing a significant role in bringing in the necessary investments that will lead to high quality job creation, increasing the share of wage and salaried workers from 48% in 2021 to a range of 53 to 55% by 2028. With the creation of more better and more resilient jobs, poverty incidence is seen to be reduced from 18.1% in 2021 to a single-digit level of 9.0% in 2028. We intend to achieve these targets while adhering to prudent macroeconomic management to ensure that we do not compromise our economy's fiscal health in the medium and long term. We seek to maintain infrastructure spending at a relatively high level of about 5 to 6% of our national output until 2028. To achieve such goals, the 8-point socioeconomic agenda, covering both short-term and medium-term issues, sets the tone for the administration's priorities, policies, and programs. We are fleshing out the items on the agenda in the 2023 to 2028 Philippine Development Plan, or PDP, the country's medium-term development blueprint. This document will assess critical development issues, identify the strategies and outcomes expected by 2028. In recognition of the urgency of the problems we face today, the President has ordered the National Economic Development Authority to submit the PDP no later than year-end. I would like to emphasize key points in the agenda which are highly relevant to the private sector. As the government looks to improve the purchasing power of Filipinos, relevant government agencies will streamline regulatory processes to ensure the reliable and seamless movement of goods, food in particular. To ensure that we will no longer have to implement costly lockdowns, we will continue vaccination and booster programs and strengthen our surveillance systems to safeguard public health. In education, the return to face-to-face schooling will seek to address the learning losses incurred in the past 2 years. To avoid leakage and wasting limited funds for social protection, the Philippine Identification System and the National ID will be fully utilized to provide targeted subsidies to the neediest households. The President himself emphasized the need to undertake digitalization of the bureaucracy as public institutions must evolve with the times and implement measures to improve the ease of doing business for processes such as applying for permits, paying taxes, and obtaining records. Additionally, to ensure that students qualify for higher quality jobs, there must be closer coordination with the private sector concerning job facilitation and skills development program. The proper implementation of the national competition policy, the enforcement of pro-competitive regulations, and the reduction of structural barriers to entry will ensure that the playing field for competition is free and fair, so that consumers may enjoy lower prices and higher quality of goods and services. Of course, for economic activity to flourish, public order and safety, as well as peace and security, must serve as our foundation. In his SONA, President Marcos identified the legislative priorities of the executive branch. The economic team notes that many of the recommendations of the private sector coincide with these priorities. Through close coordination with the legislative, we are committed to the passage of these measures to address the constraints we have identified and improve our economy's dynamism. Members of the private sector will also be pleased to know that President Marcos has given his marching orders. The relevant agencies in the executive shall facilitate more trade opportunities and ensure the proper implementation of our amended economic liberalization laws. The NEDA is mindful that in an era of interconnected value chains and global disruptions, there is a need for stronger trade partnerships and initiatives aggressively promoting trade diversification, given geopolitical uncertainties. Thus, we support the SONA's ratification of the regional comprehensive economic partnerships and are reviewing and improving other trade agreements. The NEDA has also been obtaining inputs from relevant agencies to complete the implementing rules and regulations, or IRR, of the Public Services Act. We expect to finalize this soon, given that the deadline for the issuance is in October of this year. This law and other recently passed game-changing legislative measures, namely the amended Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the Foreign Investment Act, and the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or CREATE law, will boost the dynamism of the economic landscape. This dynamism should extend to the development of the country's backbone infrastructure. This brings me to public-private partnerships, or PPPs. As all of you here may relate, the considerable infrastructure backlogs have been one of the most binding constraints that have prevented or discouraged investors from greater participation in our economy, choosing our more dynamic ASEAN neighbors instead. Given our current fiscal constraints, we will use PPPs to harness the private sector's expertise, resources, and capacity to substantially upgrade the country's infrastructure. Even as existing PPP projects are already underway, the Marcos administration aims to continue the infrastructure push to boost the competitiveness of our domestic industries and encourage more significant investment in critical sectors. To ensure that the benefits of economic growth are inclusive, we will prioritize solicited projects that fit into the approved master plans and will connect leading and lagging regions. Infrastructure in energy, logistics, transportation, telecommunications, and water, the fundamentals of any dynamic economy, will be upgraded and are seen to spur investment in manufacturing, tourism, IT BPOs, and the creative sectors. We see the growth of these sectors as contributing to high-quality job creation that can provide Filipinos productive employment and contribute to rapid poverty reduction. As you may have already heard, plans are underway to review the amended BOT law, IRR, to address the issues and concerns raised in various fora that the rules are hindering investors from participating in PPPs. Rest assured that the NEDA, in coordination with other agencies, will carefully consider the inputs of the private sector. We will ensure that PPPs as an economic partnership will sufficiently balance the interests of the public and private sectors. It's worth emphasizing that we recognize this mode of financing as an efficient way of hitting two objectives. One, prudently managing our limited resources, and second, addressing the yawning infrastructure gap. You may wonder how the economic team can remain optimistic despite the headwinds we are facing. The data on poverty shows us encouraging signs. Between 2015 and 2018, our country recorded a 6.8 percentage point poverty reduction among our population, from 23.5 to 16.7%, quite fast by our historical standards. High growth, relatively low inflation, and lower inequality accompanied this period. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic and policy response challenges increased poverty to 18% of the population. Still, this tells us that rapid poverty reduction is possible if we get our economic policies right and our acts together. We aim to reduce poverty by 5 percentage points by 2025 and another 4 percentage points by 2028 to hit our target of 9% by the end of the term. Again, this is possible if we collectively address the most binding constraints to our country's economic transformation. Thinking long term, sustaining a high growth trajectory for the next 2 decades is crucial to the country's objective of reaching high income status. The game-changing structural reforms laid down by past administrations serve as strong foundations to which we can build a more dynamic, resilient, and innovative economy that can compete on the global stage. Before I end, allow me to briefly recapitulate what the role or what the NEDA does as the country's premier socioeconomic planning body. The NEDA coordinates the formulation of policies, plans, and programs at various levels of governance to ensure that these are aligned and contribute to the country's macroeconomic and development goals. We provide high-level advice to the President, to policymakers in the executive branch, and to Congress to ensure that proposed alternatives and laws are evidence-based and adhere to sound economic principles. The NEDA also reviews, evaluates, and monitors infrastructure projects to ensure that these further socioeconomic priorities identified. And so, the private sector can count on NEDA to push and shepherd necessary reforms and to provide strong guidance on the economic policies that aim to promote sustained and inclusive economic growth in line with the long-term vision. I end my presentation with this hopeful message. The economic team will certainly do its part in steering the economy through these challenging times. The government is mindful of the significant role that the private sector plays in increasing productivity, driving innovation, creating job and market opportunities, and addressing the long-standing and emerging issues of our country faces. That there is no compelling reason to believe our country cannot reach its long-term ambitions. We can make it happen through robust partnerships between the public and private sectors. Thank you and good afternoon to all.
It's exciting, right? Public-private partnership, I think, is what the business sector is waiting for. So that's good news. So thank you, Secretary Balisacan. For our next speaker, may I call on the Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Philippe M. Medalla.
Good afternoon to everyone. In the interest of time, I'll skip the introductions because there are people here that I've known for what? More than 3 decades, 4 decades. And we all look the part. No? Oh, there's Peter there, there's Romy, of course, my good colleague Arsi. And I've known Babe Singson since I was with ERAP in Malacanang. In fact, I first met him in Malacanang. So I'll skip the pleasantries and go directly to the point. I'd like to thank MAP for the opportunity to share my insights. Of course, I'll speak about the central bank. By the way, I should always say that one of my idols is Ms. Lilia de Lima. If we had 5 people like her in government running places that attract investment, manufacturing growth will be 10% at least. Okay? Okay, see, I've heard the presentation of my good friend Arsi, and I've actually heard it before in another forum. And so what I'll say instead is what is the role of the central bank in all of this. Okay, so next slide, please. And of course, I say these are the most important things to us in the central bank. Stable prices, in other words, inflation, as defined now, inflation between 2 and 4%. Stable and strong financial system and banks. And the third one was secure, safe, and efficient payment systems, which we used to take for granted until, of course, technology changed it so rapidly. In fact, my joke always is the head of the payment settlement sector of central bank is dealing with, what, 1,000-year-old technology, maybe even 2,000. Okay, for instance, the choice between who's in the coin. Okay, remember Jesus Christ was asked, and Caesar. Then that belongs to Caesar, right? So it's a very old technology. The other one, of course, is new, which is the digital payment system, which is extremely important to us. Of course, another vision there is a payment system that's cross-border. The vision of every ASEAN country now is with a cell phone, you can buy anything wherever you are in ASEAN, regardless of which ASEAN country you are from. Okay, so, okay, but then why are these things important? Well, the best example of this is our response to the pandemic. We bought 1 trillion pesos of bonds in the secondary market because of the pandemic. People were panicking, people were all shifting to cash, trying to sell bonds. Of course, if that happens, bond prices will fall. Of course, as anybody who has taken a little bit of finance knows, that means interest rates will rise. Not just the markets were panicking, doing exactly the opposite of what should happen. Because conventional wisdom says, when you have a pandemic, capex will drop, but the desire to save is actually be higher. So therefore, interest rates must drop. In other words, the markets were going crazy, and we came to the rescue. 1 trillion pesos in the secondary market. By the way, 1 trillion is a lot because our balance sheet at the time was just 4.5 trillion. And then, of course, we lent 600 billion to the government, interest-free. That stabilized the situation. In other words, the collapse of the economy of 9.5% could have been a lot worse. Now, of course, the question you ask is, where did we get the power to do that? And the answer is our independence. During all those years, we never, quote-unquote, printed money to support the government. We bought a lot of foreign currency. Of course, mostly the king dollar, no? Nice. Bought a lot of dollars. Well, we bought some pounds too, okay? So, we bought some euros. Of course, with negative interest rates, we said, well, these are not nice assets to have, no? So, but at any rate, the point was, because our independence was respected by government after government after government, as the economy needed more money, we produced the money by buying foreign assets. Okay? So when the time came, that COVID came, we had more than enough resources to shore things out. Okay? In addition, because inflation was stable, the share of longer-term bonds in government debt was rising. Okay? So this is the kind of environment we wanted to create. Price stability so that fixed-rate loans are possible. Because if nobody knows what the inflation will be, 10% may be high if you think inflation is 3, but it's low if you think inflation is 20, right? And by the way, the best sign that there is too much inflation is the menu is very expensive, made of leather. And all the things in the menu are printed in very nice numbers, but no prices. It just says, ask the waiter, because the price will change every day. Now, creating this environment is extremely important, and we are very glad that government and the Constitution itself created a central bank that's independent, and a law was written to make it independent. And so far, by the way, my entire 11 years in the Monetary Board, not once were we told by government, oh, we like this interest rate, we hate this interest rate, do this, do that, do not close that bank, be nice to this bank, is my friend. Okay, so this is the kind of environment you're in. Of course, that was at the same time accompanied by very good fiscal management. By the way, the man you were honoring, President Ramos, said, oil price stabilization, abolish that, because it doesn't work in Philippine politics. By the way, the entire idea behind oil price stabilization is when international prices are rising, subsidize. And get the money to subsidize it when prices are falling. Collect when prices are falling, subsidize when prices are rising. Of course, you let politicians manage it, they will follow it only when the price is rising. So the subsidy will be unfunded. And Ramos had a vision to say, the Philippines must be educated. Fuel prices are driven by international forces. Government has no business trying to stabilize it. And sooner or later, but there were large protests, but sooner or later, everybody learned about it, lived with it. Then came, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo increased the VAT from 10 to 12%, and included fuel in. By the way, that time, fuel was subject to excise tax, not subject to VAT. She said, let's cover it with VAT. Very unpopular decisions. And then later on, in the case of Secretary Dominguez, let's cut income taxes, let's raise fuel taxes, let's raise taxes on cigarettes, let's raise taxes on sugary drinks. All the right moves. So our country, in other words, has a long history of good fiscal and monetary policies. Of course, I wish we can say the same thing about infrastructure. By the way, if everybody was like Babe Sing Son, most of those problems will be solved. Okay? But my point is, there are many things to be happy about. Okay, so this, okay, skip the next 2 slides, please, so that we can be faster. Okay, so the point is that, okay, we must create the environment where all of this will happen. By the way, the worst thing for a central banker is the loss, well, in the literature it's called fiscal dominance. You print more money than you should because you're saving government. And that's a very big dilemma, because if your choice is letting it default and printing money to save it, the second is the lesser of 2 evils. And this is one thing about our country. We, in spite of all the things we were quarreling about, we were able to agree on many things, right? We were able to agree that the time called for a higher VAT and a VAT that covered more things. By the way, we were quickly rewarded by capital markets. This I cannot forget. When I was in NEDA with ERAP, the spread was 600 basis points. 10-year dollar bond of the Philippine government compared to, of course, a 10-year dollar bond of the U.S. government. What's the only difference? The borrower. Why were we paying 6% more? And the answer is they thought we will default. Of course, the moment this market started believing we won't, well, how much is it now? 100 basis points? In other words, the yield from VAT alone is small compared to all the savings that came from the lower spreads. And like it or not, the corporations for which you work will have to pay higher than the government, right? It's always corporate borrowing equals sovereign plus 50 basis points, right? If you're a really good corporation. 25 basis points, a really good corporation. So all these reforms we take for granted, they happen. And this produced a fantastic period of 6.5% growth, less than 3% inflation, and falling poverty. Of course, we were also gifted by very talented Filipinos that attracted BPOs. And of course, we exported a lot of workers. So the quality of the Philippine labor force, plus the excellent fiscal and monetary management, produced us a wonderful period. So the question is, can we replicate it? Before I go to the topic, the first thing I'd like to say, of course, is the banking system is quite strong, very well capitalized, and they make provisions for losses. By the way, if a bank behaves badly or is more risky, we tell them to raise capital. I will not tell you which bank. A bank was hacked, so we told them, okay, 3%, 1% more capital for you, just for you. Your capitalization is higher by 1% because you have operational risk. Okay, the wonderful thing about this is banks obey us. By the way, the only time they obey us, they do not obey us, is when we close them. Then they'll sue the pants. They want to sue. By the way, I'll be sued till I'm 90 or what, but we don't mind, no? Okay, so okay, we have strong banks. And next slide, please. Okay, and you can see that from the recovery of the lending growth. Okay, so strong banks, that's a fairly good news. Of course, we were surprised. Okay, by the way, the the rescue package we had for the government during the pandemic, it was so large that, of course, the IMF noticed it. It looked at our balance sheet. Why is your balance sheet now 7 billion rather than 4.5? You must be doing a lot of things. And the answer is yes. And they called it unconventional. We told them it's not unconventional because it's in our charter. No, they said it's unconventional because you never did it before. So the key is the central bank during good times accumulates assets. Because the economy is growing, it can issue more money. And because their faith in the currency, people want to hold that currency. Each one of you, I challenge you to do this. Take the ratio of Philippine peso-denominated deposits to dollar-denominated deposits in the FCDU. You'd see that ratio rising very rapidly. Okay, so these are the good things that are going for us. Now, of course, the problem is any rescue plan must have an exit. No central bank should ever rescue the economy and then ask, now that we have done this, how do we get out of this? But by the way, that's a big question in the rich countries. You do a lot of QE. How do you get it back? How do you wind down what you have created? By the way, in the US, I think before the global financial crisis, the balance sheet was 4.5 trillion. Now it's about 7. No, 0.9 trillion. Now it's 7 trillion. How do you exit? In our case, we said we will exit as the economy recovers. We will gradually lift the rates. 25, 25, 25, 25. And then we will let the securities that we bought mature gradually. Of course, as they say, the plans of mice and men often go awry, right? Comes a surprise. American interest rate, U.S. interest rates are 75, 75, 75. And now the question is, what's next? And you have that, of course, the exit has to be more rapid. So we're exiting much faster. We already asked the government, but the government already paid us back the advance on the 600 billion. We're allowing the 1 trillion to run off our balance sheet as they mature. Maybe in the next 2 years, 200 billion of that will mature. And then, of course, our interest rate increases were a lot larger than expected. By the way, they're a lot larger than I expected 3 months before that. That was a lot of the things that happened were not foreseen. But nonetheless, I'm quite optimistic that the economy remains strong and can actually absorb the rate increases that we have. Of course, whether the last one we did yesterday, right? 50 is the last one. Nobody knows, right? The corny answer is, I will look at the data. But that's exactly what we will do. Now, if I were to bet, okay, the one question I ask is, if you bet 1,000 pesos, you're betting against, this was the last increase for the year, and the other one is, no, this is not the last increase after the year. I did a poll. How much will you need to accept the bet of 1,000 pesos? By the way, a friend of mine said 9,000. What does that mean? If he bets 1,000 for no more increases, he expects to be paid 9,000 if he wins. Okay, of course, for those of you who know how to compute probabilities backward, you can compute, okay? Okay, next slide is a view of the future. You have the pan chart? Yeah, the pan chart, that's our forecast before the meeting. Okay, inflation will fall to 4%. By the way, the only reason August inflation is 5.4 is we're averaging because the first 3 months were low, January, February, March. So 5.4 is really an average of low numbers in January, February, March, and high numbers the last 3 or 4 months. Because remember, the last one is 6.4. And some people are saying that, well, it's actually going to rise because it has not peaked yet. My own personal bet is the peak will come in September, October. Okay, then after that, as global prices start to fall, partly because people are expecting U.S. recession, then we will have lower inflation. By the way, our techno-speak for that is we're moving towards a target consistent inflation path. By the way, the rule for central bankers is be as vague as you want to be. You know, I use these terms, confuse people, because we don't really want you to understand us too much, okay? Because if you understand us too much, we are in trouble. No, I'm kidding. That was the old philosophy before Bernanke. Okay, when more and more academics went to central banking, we said, tell you exactly what we think is going to happen, and that's what we're doing. Of course, that's called forward guidance, but if you don't know what's going to happen, don't say anything, right? It's hard to guide when you yourself don't know what's going to happen. And that's the other part of transparency. Okay, next. So, but by the way, because of our measures, that's no longer going to be 4. Because we took the 50. Because that was assuming we were not doing the 50. Okay, so the actual inflation, expected average inflation, as you can see, the revisions downwards are partly because we expect commodity prices to start easing, but also we expect our policy rate hikes to eventually bite. But it takes at least 6 to 12 months before they actually work. In other words, there's nothing we can do about the current high inflation from a monetary standpoint. Of course, the thing to do is don't let bureaucrats and politicians decide when and how much to import, because there'll be a screw-up somewhere, right? Oh, is it 300 metric tons? No. 150? Who said 300? Who said 150? Everybody's blaming everybody. Okay, so get the bureaucracy and the politicians out of import decisions. And the best way to do that is you want high protection, impose high tariffs. You want low protection, impose low tariffs. The debate should be on how high the tariffs should be. And then, by the way, some of the people in agriculture already called me one of the biggest villains in the country, okay, for saying that. Because of course, they want a very non-transparent way of protecting the agricultural sector. By the way, it creates a lot of room for rent seeking, because he who gets permits to import could, instead of the government getting the difference between the Philippine price and the foreign price, they get it. Worse, if you give quotas to a few people who connive, they can cartelize. Okay, so, and the best lesson how to do it was already demonstrated by Secretary Dominguez when they tariffied rice. Okay, so these are some of the reforms we have all to fight for. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this is one of the reasons we raise rates. Okay, as you can see, the red bar is on the leftmost charts is the proportion of items below 2%. You know, you can see how quickly it shrinks. It was shrinking. Used to be the predominant item, you know, it's 2 or less. By the way, the reason it's 2 or less is, of course, I'm of course joking. Globe is already overcharging us. They cannot raise the rates anymore. Huh? Si Rome, no. So, my barber has not yet raised his rates. By the way, if he starts raising his rates, we really are in trouble. The inflation has really crept in everywhere. No? So some items are, of course, not quite resistant to demand pressures because it's very expensive to change price. But you notice that those items are getting fewer and fewer, and the purple, which is above 4%, is growing. So that means inflation is beginning to creep throughout the system, and we had to act. In other words, the inflation you're seeing now, compared to inflation you're seeing before, is now the reaction of the markets to the high imported inflation. Okay, again, pardon the use of jargon, second-order effects, which we have to stop. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're beginning to see that there as well. Okay, minimum wages adjustment in fares, and so on and so forth. Of course, if everything else is rising, the others who do not have originally plan to raise prices must now raise theirs. Okay, next slide. Okay, and the other way to look at it is a comparison of a weighted median, which removes all the items that are going up a lot, and the headline, which includes everything. And as you can see, the blue line was skyrocketing. But more alarming is even if you take out those big ticket items that are going up, the red line is now inching up closer and closer to 4. So we had to act. Have we done enough? Maybe yes, maybe no. And I asked the Monetary Board for permission to give you a hint. They voted not to give me. Okay? So, okay, so it's, that itself is a debate in the Monetary Board. How much can you say other than, can I signal forward? And they said no. Okay, so I don't want to be impeached, so no, they won't. They are my friends. Right? So, okay. Now, okay. Next item. Yeah, this compares the U.S. Philippines in number of adjustments in the policy rate. You see, they've done 225. We've done 175. We have no choice. We have to respond to the Fed, but we don't have to match every point that they do, because their inflation is higher, as shown in the next chart. Can you, there. Okay, the US is 8.5. We are 6.4. By the way, an even better way to look at this is the ratio of the inflation of the 10-year average for all the countries to the current. Now, which country has one of the lowest ratios? Philippines and China. Now, this is a global phenomenon, this inflation, and relative to others, we're doing better. Of course, it's hard to do better than China, okay? They can lock you in for other things other than, oh no, I shouldn't do that. I get trouble with the Chinese embassy, okay? So, now, as you can see, Euro, 7.4 is the ratio. United Kingdom, 5.2, right? USA, 4.5. In other words, the inflation they're experiencing now is 4.5 times higher than what they used to. In the case of the Philippines, it's only, well, that I can say only is, because it's large, but it's smaller than the others. I should not use only. No? Is only 2.3 times. So in other words, yeah, of course, China is only 1.3 times. By the way, don't take pictures because you'll get copies of this if you want. No? Okay. Everything I put here is available from our website, from any other public source. Okay, next slide. Okay, and as I already said, what scares me, well, I never really get scared, but the policy rate is 3.75 now, but relative to inflation is still low. So by and large, our monetary policy is still accommodative. Okay, but the point is, if a foreigner is not looking at the gap, they're looking at the nominal gap between our interest rate and the US interest rate. Imagine a world where our policy rate is the same as the US. Okay? So clearly, where will the money go? So we have no choice but to respond. By the way, it's called the Impossible Trinity, and Romy will explain to you what it means. Next slide. Okay, so we're also, the other side of it, aside monetary policy, is of course, we are very, very concerned about digitalization and, of course, inclusion. And fortunately, they go together. Because without the telcos, the number of people with some form of bank accounts would have been much lower. In other words, brick and mortar is a very expensive way to reach depositors. Next slide. Okay, so I think, of course, my final point is, let's avoid fiscal dominance at all costs. That the central bank is put in a position with two very undesirable choices. Finance the government or let it default. So, will economic growth solve the debt problem? By the way, the current numbers for this year is yes. Because even if we grow only at 6%, inflation is already 5.5%. So nominally, the economy is already growing at 11%. Average interest rate is less than 5%. So we will outgrow the debt. Of course, the more difficult problem is, what if the growth rate is 3%? And inflation is back to 3%. Not true anymore, right? And when that time comes, I hope it doesn't come, we will have a very, very objective discussion on how we solve the problem. By the way, that problem cannot be solved unless we all agree. Okay, so that's my message, that if it turns out a year or two from now that we are over-optimistic about economic growth, then we have to go to plan B, which is, how do we increase tax revenue? And my best solution is, all of you over-declare your incomes when you, of course, I'm kidding, when you file your income tax. So maraming salamat at
Governor Medalla, you remind me of a favorite professor in college. Do you teach? So good. Learned so much. So yeah, may we call on Secretary BALISACAN to come on stage for the Q&A. So may I also call on our moderators for today, MAP Governor and Assistant Treasurer, the dashing, the debonair, Romy Bernardo, and MAP Governor Peter Wallace. So there are microphones on the floor for your use in asking your questions. Please be brief, and please refrain from making a speech. Please wait to be acknowledged before you ask your questions. We are now ready for the Q&A, so take it away, Romy and Peter.
Okay, I'm not used to not giving speeches, so that's going to be difficult. I was very pleased to hear that Secretary BALISACAN is putting high priority on the RCEP, because that's an essential program that we must get into very quickly. And I'm wondering how he will be able to handle the opposition from that, he and Congress, because there's quite strong opposition from some of the agriculture sector, thinking that they will be affected negatively when in fact I don't believe they will. But I'm wondering if he knows how he would structure working against those opposition.
Yeah, talking about the RCEP. The RCEP. Yeah, yeah. No, even of course, our president has also similar concerns. No, initial, but we explained that there's no need to worry because indeed the flexibility is already there in the RCEP. That the agricultural sector is not going to be a sacrificial lamb, as many claims. But in fact, there's very little change that is going to happen there, and none of the what you call safeguards that a country can use, no, in the WTO is eliminated by the RCEP. So it's all there. So if there are oversurge in importation, you can use the WTO safeguards, not the, so you should have any concern about RCEP.
Romy?
Let me ask a question. Afterwards, we'll open it to the audience, if I may. If I may ask a question in two parts. How confident are you of achieving even the low end of your 6 to 8% growth target, considering the external and domestic headwinds, including lingering effects of the pandemic, high global and domestic inflation impacting on consumption, higher interest rates impacting on investments, possible global recession, much restricted fiscal space due to pandemic, limited monetary headroom? Where will the growth come from? The second part of the question is, if despite excellent economic management, growth falters, and thus your objective of bringing down the fiscal deficit to GDP to 3% by the end of the 6-year term, public debt to GDP, instead of going back down, may actually be explosive. What can we expect in terms of adjustment or remedial measures that might be undertaken by government?
Are you sure you want to stay here till tonight?
Yeah, exactly.
That will require a lot of discussions. But if I listen to Romy during my first term at NEDA, because we hear the same kind of causation, criticism or caution when I was also, I guess, one of those who insisted that we should keep the high growth trajectory no matter how the World Bank or ADB was downgrading us at the time. Because what's planning if not, if you keep adjusting downward or upward as there are some turbulence, instead of looking for things that you can do to adjust. I think the experience at the time is, yes, despite the challenges, we were able to grow at an average of 6.3% for the entire period. Of course, the times this time are very different, very challenging. We did not have pandemic. We did not have this kind of global headwinds. But we believe that, again, looking at the past decade, where, as I flashed in the slide, the growth was hardly sensitive to what was happening outside. Correlation was very low, meaning that the growth was coming from inside. And that was not difficult to appreciate, because if you look at on the demand side of our income accounts, almost 70% of that income is really just consumption, and of course driven by the remittances, among other things, including low interest rates. But also looking at the supply side, a lot of it's also services. No? 60% of your GDP is really services. And so that consumption and the services are really quite domestic. And then what's also happened is over time, the composition of our foreign exchange has changed significantly, right? Before, we were just dependent on exports of goods and borrowing, right? But over the years, in recent years, you have now remittances, you have earnings from BPOs, you have, and of course, still the borrowing, you have the investment. So it's now more diversified. And I think the other two, the first two, the BPOs and the remittances are quite robust, quite stable. Look at how the BPOs performed during the pandemic. They saved the economy in a way. No? So I think that in the near term, at least, in the near term, I think that those drivers will remain, will continue. In fact, the expansion of the services sector in 2021 hasn't recovered the 2019 level. And so and then the opening of the economy is not yet even complete, no? So as we completely open the economy, and I think that we should, and we must continue that push, there would have a more robust, vigorous domestic activity, economic activity in the economy. It helps, of course, if in next year or after that the global headwinds, will turn the other way, so that now we can also take advantage of these other drivers, particularly manufacturing and investment. Investment. There's another one that one reason why I'm so upbeat. The country is entering what we call demographic dividend. In recent years, you look at the working age population that has grown faster than the total labor force or total population. 1.9%, if I remember the number, versus 1.4%. No? So now, what that needs to be done to take advantage of that demographic bonus is to ensure that investment comes in and expand. As I recall, the gross domestic capital formation is about what? 2021, something like 21% of GDP. Even if you look at Vietnam, they're into about 30 or something. But if you can bring that ratio for the Philippines to just even 25%, you can achieve that 7%. So that's why, to me, getting the private sector invest is the key. To get this demographic dividend working for us. And that is for our neighbors, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, China. That demographic dividend worked for them for 2 to 3 decades. So you have a window for sustained growth, and that's why we should really work together to make sure that we won't dissipate or lose that opportunity.
Amen, Secretary. Anything you want to add to that, Governor?
Clearly, our ability to attract firms that do things that we don't know very well, to locate here is key. Let me give you an example where the success stories. JP Morgan has very little banking business in the Philippines, but they have 16,000 employees here. Hong Kong, Shanghai is what? 6,000. Deutsche Bank has 3,000 or 4,000. The question I ask is, why are we not observing that in manufacturing? Okay, so what can we do to attract manufacturing locations in the Philippines. The other positive side is growth is going to be relatively easy to achieve in the short term because what was restricting growth was fear of the virus and restrictions on mobility. As those things, by the way, my own view of the virus is becoming less deadly. So I'm looking at BSP statistics. There was a spike in infections, but no one was hospitalized. So if that's the case, much milder, no congestion in the hospital. Our first, by the way, if it's happening all over the world, then tourism will recover. So we have to do our best to make sure that when it recovers, the tourists will come here. And I don't see why not. Anyone who's been to the El Nido Islands, anyone who's been to Boracay, and then in what place in the world can the tourist converse with the ordinary person, including the cigarette vendor? Okay? So there are advantages that we have, But I think the disadvantages in manufacturing are very real. That's why I keep saying we need more Dilimas who will tell the people who locate here, we will take care of your problems. If you have to deal with local governments, you have to deal with whatnot, which they are not familiar with. So I think we should move towards investment promotion rather than investment incentives. Okay, so all of those things. So we can, now on the other hand, the problem is we can easily stimulate growth. You know that already through monetary policy. Our problem is if we grow very much faster than our neighbors, our imports will grow much faster than our exports. And we will have what's called, which we already have right now, the double deficit. Deficit na nga ang gobyerno, deficit pa rin yung buong bansa. So people, foreigners will have to finance part of the government deficit. And if they lose faith in us, the spreads rise. Yep. And as you know, in economics, the marginal player determines the rate. And the last thing we want is us going back to the, as I said, my experience was when I was in NEDA was very high. Of course, that's very, very unlikely. But even just the spread rising by 50, 100 basis points is already going to be costly. So my point is, how I ended my speech, let's be open to, if the growth rate doesn't materialize as expected, we go to plan B. Let's find a way of pain sharing. We cannot have all the infrastructure that we need and think that somebody else will pay for it. Now, of course, in the short run, if you have so much borrowing credibility as we have right now, you can finance it by borrowing, and it will pay for itself. But if you borrow too much, then it can come back to bite you. So I think that should be the discussion. When that time comes, how do you prevent that from happening? What taxes are fairest? Of course, we all say, let's improve administration. Every administration has said that, and it didn't happen. So there may become a time when we have to say, we may face our GMA moment, which was increase VAT from 10 to 12%, cover electricity. Okay, and this is where associations like MAP are very useful because you're not political. In fact, what I heard was the GMA was already faltering whether to continue with it. And her dialogues with important business leaders is what gave her the courage to.
That's correct.
That's correct. Move forward. So I hope that when that day comes, where the best scenarios, which is we will outgrow the debt, doesn't happen, we are ready as a nation to come together and say, this is how we will share the pain and the cost. Because eventually, our children and grandchildren will benefit.
Thank you, Governor.
Let's ask the audience, shall we, for a question?
Let's ask
Somebody in the audience.
somebody
got a
from the
question?
audience would like to ask anyone. Or while if
Yes.
Yeah, Doctora Cora.
Cora.
Can you hear me? Sobra, sorry. Okay. Congratulations to both our speakers. Both of you talked about sustainable growth. Masyadong malakas, no? We used to have the Philippine Council for Sustainable Development that seemed to have been mothballed or died after then Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Arsi BALISACAN moved to the Competitiveness Commission. Is there a plan to revive that? Because MAP was very active in it, and I represented MAP there. The second question that I have is, we have been using GDP as the measure of our economic growth, but as we economists, I'm partly one, that doesn't cover all the capital forms, especially what I think we have a lot of, that is our natural capital above the ground and below the ground, especially our mines. Is there any effort to seriously consider that in the economic growth measurement? We have worked to file with, through Senator Ligarda, a bill on the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting to start that process.
Yeah, okay, and the first one, the Philippine Council for Sustainable Development. I think that was creation of President Ramos, no? Of course, it's in our interest to ensure that sustainability issues are reflected in the current plan, particularly the Philippine Development Plan. In fact, that's the theme of the Philippine Development Plan is resiliency and sustainability, and a lot of these issues. Now, whether or not we'll be able to mobilize the PCSD is something else, but we are moving in that direction. But I will look into the issue and what happened to the PCSD, no? What happened, whether it still has a budget there or not. And the second one, and these measures of well-being, no? And of course GDP is one of those measures, and the wealth accounting has been going on, for some time. Many governments have been trying to implement a wealth accounting with assistance of various organizations like the World Bank and the UN system, but it hasn't really acquired a firm footing, no, as GDP. I guess part of the reason is that it's so difficult to implement because of the kind of information that you need to implement to do a wealth accounting. And in those countries where I have seen where such was implemented, one can easily question the numbers because of for example, you just use one lake or one area, impute that to represent the entire country, and that raises a lot of representativeness issues. And when I was working on this with PSA and with our other academic colleagues, no, including PIDS, no, what became clear was the data that you need to support a wealth accounting is simply not there, not part of the statistical system. So until we get the statistical system produce good data, representative data, it's extremely difficult to come up with a national level wealth accounting. But I think you could do some location specific accounts, like for example Laguna de Bay area. You can do that, but using the information for Laguna de Bay area to represent that for the entire country, that will subject the whole exercise to question. So that's usually I think where the problem lies.
Just perhaps the last question on something came up from our map board discussion, and I think something close to the heart of President Babe Singson. Are you supporting the adoption of an integrated water resources management program through the creation of a Department of Water Resources?
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's Sec Babes and I's advocacy when we were both in the cabinet, because when we look at the problem of water, there are just so many agencies involved, with very conflicting, overlapping, and you really don't know what's happening there. No? So inefficient, and yet we are just so vulnerable to risk. Metro Manila, for example, you have only one source of water, and if something happens there, what do you do? So it's really very serious, and I think that that the move of the president to include that as part of his priority measures to pass the law, toward the creation Department of Water, so that these different agencies can be better rationalized. It's a good direction, and I think that we do this time. I think with the political capital of the president in Congress, I think that we have a good chance that law will pass.
My column this Monday is in support of that, because it's headed 3 days, because without water for 3 days you die. So it's very important that we have a Department of Water. Yeah, so I have a column on that on Monday. You can read it.
Very good.
Ruth.
Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Balisacan, Governor Medalla, Romy, and Peter. Once again, I would like to thank our speakers. For sharing their time and expertise with us, and thank you everyone for joining us today. The MAP Economic Briefing and General Membership Meeting is adjourned.
I talked to Lino the other day. Yeah. How can we help in that? Yeah, he mentioned, yes. It's the water. But then somebody was so important.